following stories are timeslip incidences where two young men had their world momentarily turned upside down. Cricket pitch timeslip. It was late spring in 1994 and early evening at around 6:40 p.m. when 13-year-old English boy called Zach Pearce was heading off to cricket practice. The location was somewhere in central England, and the cricket pitch that he normally practiced on was in the grounds of a hospital. The ground was mainly used by the staff at the hospital, where his father got him involved in the sport. The weather was fairly mild, where a storm had recently passed over an hour earlier, and the sun was now out. Because it had been raining, he was not sure whether the practice match had been cancelled, but nevertheless made his way to the ground and arrived at 6:30 p.m. On looking at the ground, he noticed that the main playing area was surrounded by small poles, which was obviously there to discourage people from walking onto the playing surface. As he got closer, he noticed that some idiot had taken out some of the poles and dropped them onto the ground. He then made his way to the middle of the pitch and slowly placed each pole back into the ground and looped the rope back around each pole. After completing this task, he walked across to the far side of the ground towards two huts, where hut number 1 was for changing and hut number 2 was for storage. He then waited around until a friend of his arrived on his bicycle. His friend then cycled around the pitch, dismounted and leaned his bike up against the hut number 1, which happened to face hut number 2. They waited around a while longer and decided that the practice match had probably been cancelled, but knew that the team would be meeting in about 20 minutes later in the social club, which is where they would normally have congregated after training. So with 20 minutes to kill, they decided to look for a ball that they could throw to each other. While his friend looked around the hedgerow where lost balls often landed, he thought he'd try his luck in the storage hut number 2 and forced his way in. The door to the hut was a split door, like the ones you'll find in a stable. So he slowly prized the two doors apart and was able to create enough of a gap to crawl into. It was fairly dark, but he knew the layout of the hut and made his way to the kit bag under the table and managed to locate what he was looking for. He slowly backed out of the hut and turned around to face the cricket pitch. He then looked up at the sky to see that it had darkened again and the grey clouds had returned to block out the previous sunny weather. As he cast his eyes back to the pitch, he was annoyed to find that the poles he had previously realigned were now back in exactly the same position where they'd been when he first arrived. He then turned to his right and noticed that his friend's bike was no longer leaning against hut number 1. He quickly scanned the hedgerow to search for his friend, but he was nowhere to be seen. He carefully scanned the ground to see if he was cycling away, but there was nothing. It was deserted. At this stage, he figured his friend was playing a trick on him, and so walked back towards hut number 2 to return the ball to the kit bag and cursing at the same time as he again crawled through the same gap. After placing the ball back into the bag, he repeated the same procedure by slowly backing out of the hut. As he turned around, he found the sun was back in the sky, and then looked around the pitch, only to see that the poles were back in their holes. His friend's bike was once again against hut number 1, and he was just crawling out of the hedgerow, having given up his search for a ball. He asked his friend what he was playing at by moving the bike and the poles. Feeling incensed, he was obviously oblivious to the fact that the sun was suddenly shining again, and in the short time he was in the hut, his friend could not possibly have hidden his bike, ran around, taking out the poles and quickly running back into the hedgerow. It wasn't possible. His friend looked at him totally bemused at what he was talking about and could only deny any wrongdoing. However, his friend told him that he'd observed some strange oddities himself. While he was in the hedgerow, he did notice the weather suddenly becoming duller and overcast and cold. He also looked across at his friend coming out of hut number 2, look around for a few minutes, then appeared to look directly at him in the hedgerow as he approached, to be muttering something before returning to the hut. Over the years, he's tried to explain the events of what happened that day to get some sort of answer, and the only explanation he could give is that he experienced some sort of time slip. The missing store. The following unusual story took place in Prattsburg, New York, when a young man called Nathan Chappell had just had dinner and was feeling extremely tired and decided to go to bed early at around 8 p.m. After a really deep sleep, he awoke at 7 a.m. and walked towards his bedroom window to check out what the weather was like. As he stared out of the window, he couldn't help but notice everything appeared strange. All of the buildings outside appeared to be a different colour, but he put it down to still being half asleep and thought nothing more about it. He then went into the kitchen to have some breakfast and grabbed a box of cereal. He then opened the fridge only to find his annoyance that it had run out of milk. He quickly got dressed and headed out the door, jumped on his motorbike and headed down to the local Dollar General store to grab some more milk. When he arrived at the intersection, he noticed that the traffic lights were not working, as per normal, just flashing. After riding safely through the flashing lights, he continued on his journey to the store. As he was riding, he quickly looked up at the sky and thought it strange that the sun was high in the sky as if it was in the afternoon, knowing full well that it was still early morning. When he reached what he expected to be the dollar store, he quickly slammed on his brakes to find that there was no store, just a construction site. He thought, why the hell did they tear down the store? It wasn't that old. He then jumped off of his motorbike and looked across to a construction worker and headed towards him. As he approached the worker, the man screamed out, "Hey, you're not allowed around here." Ignoring his orders, he asked the worker, why were they tearing down the Dollar General? The worker, surprised by his question, replied, "Well, how do you know this is going to be a Dollar General? For your information, we're not tearing it down, we're building it. You'd better leave the area as this is for authorised personnel only." After hearing that the store was not being pulled down but instead was being built, he almost fainted. In a state of shock, he quickly jumped on his bike and headed home, not sure what had just happened to him. At this stage, he felt like he was losing his mind. From the moment he got out of bed, things had not been normal. For some strange reason, he spun his bike around and headed back to the dollar store. As he approached, he saw that the traffic lights were now working normally, and this time the sky was much darker, as it should have been at that time of day. As he approached the store, he had a sigh of relief because the dollar store was back where it should have been, surrounded by traffic and no construction site. As he was staring with relief at the store, he noticed a policeman come up behind him with his lights flashing. He got out of the car and said he was doing 65 in a 30 zone. Still in shock, he explained what had just happened to him to the policeman. He just stared back at the young man and said, that's going to happen sometimes, which was an unusual response in itself. The young man showed his driver's license and the policeman ran it through the computer. Surprisingly, he didn't get a ticket and let him off with a warning. The young man looked up at the sky, saw that it was about to rain and headed back home. After the incident, he was feeling totally spooked and asked a friend to stay the night because if this happened again, he wanted a witness. The following day, they woke when nothing out of the ordinary had happened. However, after the weird events of that morning, he was now rattled and feared he might wake up one morning to another slip in time.